that for us.
So the Conservative Party just voted to end the hereditary peers.
It is now largely based, you get there on merit, you're appointed, and if you want to have an elected house, not only are you going to create deadlock with the House of Commons, but you're going to have a bunch of people sitting in front of us trying to be elected for another chamber that we don't need in this country. Secondly, do you really believe the Liberal Democrats would support electoral reform for any other reason than the fact that they're a struggling third party and always have been?
Don, you made a good point about, Labour was elected with 35% of the people who turned out to vote. But isn't that only partially to do with the actual system and more to do with the fact that parts of the country are wildly overrepresented, such as Scotland and the north of England, and parts of the country are wildly underrepresented? Isn't it Labour's real failing to actually change the size and, population of the constituencies that they're now running in?
Actually, I don't think you're correct in that. The sad truth is, however, we do have a situation where there are many constituencies at the moment where if you've got the right label, party label attached to your name, you've almost got a safe seat. They're like rotten boroughs. And so we do have to make change. But it's the job of the electoral reform organisations to sort out boundaries. And broadly speaking, I think they've got it right. So I don't think we can blame it on that. But we could argue this, is that there are actually far too many members of Parliament. 650 for a country the size of ours is far too many. So I would reduce it, and my party would, by 150. And that's part of the package of devolving power away from central government to local government, part of the sharing of power to the people.
Okay, thank you. If we can move on to the next one, you covered both of you.
Thank you, Daniel O'Toole, SE President. One of the things that affects us all. One of the things that affects all of us in here, we're all students, is tuition fees. One of the things our National Union of Students is campaigning on now is a pledge to vote against the proposed increase in tuition fees in the next Parliament and to pressure the government to introduce a fairer alternative. Have you guys signed up to this pledge? If not, why not? Thank you.
Okay, could we go to Ricky first?
Bit of a no-brainer, actually. I signed it straight away. Yes, of course I did. I don't know if Dad come here, by the way. The thing about this, I don't know about my colleague on the right. I won't smack anymore or something. Is we've all been to university, so we share your pain.
You didn't pay for your education.
Pardon?
You didn't pay for your education.
That's exactly. We share your pain. We perpetuate the system with exams, and we perpetuate the system with homework. I'm talking as a ex-teacher, I mean. But the important thing is that we have to change this ship around with regard to tuition fees. Go back to the system that I was lucky enough to be under, namely return to a current system. The fact that, I'm sure my colleagues can say exactly the same thing, the fact that so many students are leaving university with horrendous debt, and the first job they get, in fact, they go out of the way not to get a job, so they don't have to pay it back. It's just so daft, So anyway, I certainly signed the pledge, and I think I'm going to be on telly after this with students using telly as well to say just as much. So thank you very much.
Yeah, we've all been to university, Ricky. I delivered some sand once to university. We are totally opposed. I've got an 18-year-old daughter who glibly announced to me, "Yo, Dad, going to university." I said, "She said, I'm going to be 20 grand in debt." I said, "You're what?" I said, "You're not." I'm a businessman. I was in a squat 20 years ago. This is a great country, and I said to her, "I'll explain to you how you go through university, you're not going to end up with a debt-based life. Just don't accept debt, it's wrong. We believe in a return to the student grant system." I totally agree with Ricky. He may be being sick at the moment. And I've just suddenly realised to you guys, I'm on the left. That's all I've got to say. We totally believe in the grant system, and yes, I'm not aware if we've signed the pledge, but yeah, that's in our manifesto. I'll sign it now. Okay.
I'm sure Don is going to tell you in a minute how the Liberal Democrats are suddenly going to abolish tuition fees.
So what they say in that manifesto then?
I've not signed the pledge, and the reason is, at the moment, it's simply not affordable. And if you, in fact, listen to what Nick Clegg said himself only a few months ago, he said, we need to treat people as grown-ups and we need to be realistic. Ending tuition fees would cost billions of pounds every year. We need to be certain we can afford it before we make any promises. And Don will also tell you it's fully costed. But actually, that's only true for the first 3 or 4 years. And Stephen Williams has actually gone on the news the other day and he said, beyond those 3 or 4 years, the cost would shoot up because far more students will be covered, and that is not covered in their costings at the moment. So what would we do? David Willits, who's our Shadow Education Secretary, has made it very clear there would be no increase in the fees unless they put universities and give a cast iron guarantee that pupils of students on low incomes could get a scholarship to cover their costs, so they could go to university. So there would be no disincentive for low-income students if the fee were to rise. And incidentally, David, I know him quite well, he's actually quite skeptical about the fee level going up. So it's far from a done deal. But to suggest that we can simply scrap it in this current environment is simply unrealistic, and I bet you the moment the Liberal Democrats get into any kind of coalition, that's the first policy they're going to drop.
They can afford it in Scotland.
And then we'll go back to Dom.
So it's a quick one, that's Fabian. So young students who are poor, basically, can get a scholarship and go to university under you guys. What about, to get a scholarship you have to get very, very good grades, presumably. What about the students who get, say, B's and C's? What about them?
They shouldn't go.
Fabian said that suddenly the Liberal Democrats are going to be in favour of abolishing tuition fees. I actually wrote the party's education manifesto in 1994 when the first talk of tuition fees was around, proposing that we wouldn't support it and how we would fund additional money to higher education to prevent it being necessary. I also remember 3 days before the 1997 election, when Tony Blair first got elected, his famous phrase, "We have no plans to introduce tuition fees." And sadly, they reneged on that and they've introduced them. Have I signed up to the pledge, Mr. President, sir? Of course I've signed up to the pledge. But can I say, I think the NUS are complete wimps. Because what you've done is you've just said you don't want them to go any higher. What you should be doing is campaigning to have them abolished altogether. It's an absolute disgrace that we have them. It's also a disgrace that we have people who suggest that we haven't costed the policy. It's actually here, Fabian. You've got a copy of our manifesto, I'm sure you have. It's in the fully costed document. It's on page 101. It even tells you what the precise cost of year 5 of the operation will be, which is 1.765 billion, very precise figure, so hardly making them up. And it also explains where the money will come from. So we are committed to doing it, and please don't suggest that if we get into a situation where we have power to do something about it, we'll abolish it or just drop it. Because just remember what happened in Scotland, Fabian, when we joined forces then with the Labour Party in the first Scottish Parliament. We had 4 key pledges in our manifesto. Every one of those commitments was met by us in coalition with the Labour Party. It included the abolition of tuition fees in Scotland. That's what's happened, and that's the situation there as a result of Liberal Democrats. We will deliver.
For the majority of poor students as opposed to the minority of poor students?
The policy is very clear. The student who would get admitted to university, if he comes from a low-income background, would, if the fees were to rise, would get that scholarship. And it's up to the university to decide which students they admit. But let me also make a point about Dom. In Scotland, when that policy was introduced, we were not in the middle of a financial crisis, and we didn't have the biggest recession, post-war recession in Britain that we're currently facing. Also, interestingly, in Scotland, where the tuition fees were not introduced, the proportion of low-income students admitted to university fell, and in England, where tuition fees were introduced, the proportion of low-income students actually rose quite significantly. So that's something else to bear in mind.